That was indeed Cut the Cord by Shinedown, the official theme song of this year's Hell in the Cell event. Hello everybody, I'm Nate the Great. You're listening to Pro Talk Wrestling live here on Spreaker.com, and it is indeed my honor and my privilege to be talking to the next living legend, WWE Hall of Famer, Larry Zbyszko. Thank you for joining us, Larry.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's fun to have a chance to talk to the fans and break my boredom of watching old movies over and over.
What movies have you been watching lately?
You know what I've been into lately is old murder mystery movies by Charlie Chan.
Really?
In like the 1930s and 40s.
Wow.
They're old murder mysteries. And Charlie Chan, I didn't know they made so many of them. So I watched the Thin Man ones, and then Charlie Chan popped up. So I've been watching the Charlie Chan murder mysteries.
Wow. Well,
yeah.
That's pretty awesome. Any other?
That was before my time. So when I was a kid, that would be the late night movie at 10 o'clock, and then at midnight TV went off the air.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you don't really see that much anymore. I mean, a lot of times when they have late nights, they have like more televised deal, like commercial stuff for some random product that they probably don't even need.
Oh, yeah. I don't really watch TV much anymore. I mean, everything I watch, has to be recorded for a movie, because I can't stand commercials, so I can't, watch a show. So it's got to be recorded first, and I can DVR, through it.
That is one of the many joys of technology here today. Well, let's well, let's get right into it. I think the first question I got to ask you is, what really got you into the idea of being a professional wrestler? A lot of people have said, it's usually family related, it's the family business, something you've always wanted to do. But what kind of stood out to you that made you want to be a professional wrestler?
You know what? Let me see if I can explain this without getting too heavy and confusing. But when I was very, very young, before grade school, I realized something about the world wasn't right. There was something that, I was hearing that wasn't right. And then the very first day of first grade, when I was sitting in this classroom and you weren't allowed to talk and you had to do this and do that and they're trying to teach you something, I kept looking out the window watching a bird that was flying around branch to branch and having a good old time. And all I knew about the school the first day of first grade was I wanted nothing to do with any of this nonsense. I just always wanted to be the bird. And that feeling stayed with me. And then when I watched, like 12, 13, we moved to Pittsburgh. First time I ever saw professional wrestling. And that's a very long story short. I got into Bruno. He was my hero. But professional wrestling just appealed to me already because it was already a different lifestyle. It wasn't the 9-to-5 suit and tie guy. I was a free spirit like the bird. It was a business that had no rules. You were on television being a superhero, good against evil. And so it just attracted me into this business because I didn't want to be in a normal world. And I knew that since I was a kid.
Oh. So kind of like a stand above the rest, kind of like one of those standout guys who, you didn't want to be kind of like in the norm. You just wanted to, take something, a different route than what a lot of people would usually choose.
Yeah, I just didn't want to be, I couldn't, be like my dad and everybody I knew, because every morning he was up suit and tie, carpooling off, and it was the same thing. And then as I got older, I saw a bit kind of life. Wrestling was great. You made money. They paid you to go see the world, over Europe, Japan, Samoa, Guam. So it was it was a great life, and it was the energy of being in front of crowds. But then it's weird because on the one hand, so you feel free like the bird, but on the other hand, when it comes to the system in like the everyday life, you kind of become like a hermit. Because you really don't want nothing to do with it. It doesn't make any sense.
I know the feel. I know the feeling. A lot of times I like to take the alternative route.
I mean, I'm normal. I mean, if you knew Ric Flair, could you imagine him with a normal job and trying to live? It just ain't gonna happen.
I can honestly imagine him just, being at a fast food joint and say, like, order up, woo! Something like that.
Yeah. You want fries? Woo!
Oh, man, that'd be the best.
Yeah, it was just kind of like destiny. And then ever since I was 12, 13, I wanted to be a professional wrestler. And I started wrestling in grade school back in Pennsylvania and started taking karate during the off season so I'd be sharp and jiu-jitsu something. And then I wound up meeting Bruno, my hero, and, he took me under his wing.
Yeah.
So it just all kind of happened like destiny, because I found out where he lived, and I caught him one day, like, driving by, and I just jumped out of the car and went through his hedges, and I just walked up to him. And, it's kind of a weird story, but, I tried to cover it in the Hall of Fame speech by saying it was just like a dream. I went down this rabbit hole, and boom, I popped out, 30 years later, but I'm something like my hero. And it was very cool.
Well, you did talk a lot about Bruno, and he had the honor of inducting you into the Hall of Fame this year. What was it like training under Bruno?
Well, it was great because Bruno was the top star of the day. And not only that, I mean, he was the most beloved, truly beloved pro wrestler ever. In a day when even the ethnic barriers were used to draw money. If you were a Polish guy, or if you were a Puerto Rican guy, or if you were a black guy. And Bruno was like really one of the first guys that came along that crossed all the borders. No one cared. It didn't matter if you were Chinese or Puerto Rican. Polish guy, you loved Bruno. He got you. And he was such a smart guy with the way he handled the programming and all that. And I was like, there. So we'd work out together, and he would talk to me, and I'd be with him when he's making deals and setting up his next big match. And I'm getting an education that no one else got in those days. I'm dealing with the top star, and then I'm dealing with the biggest promoter ever, Vince McMahon Sr. at the time. And I was a young guy for those days and that level of stuff. So just kind of an interesting kind of thing, and with all these doors open up, and all the old pros like Chief K. Strongbow and Altamores and Monsoons, and they would all be telling me stuff and helping me out where they wouldn't help anybody else out. They didn't want you in the business, but because I was Bruno's protege, it was kind of like politics. They were nice to me. They were getting points for Bruno, and I was too stupid to even realize that at the time, and I just kept sucking up the knowledge,
Yeah, and you, they did the whole deal where you were kind of his protege, and then it kind of escalated to, like teacher and student, but then you would eventually, turn on Bruno and be one of the best heels in the 80s. From what I've heard, one thing I've been wanting to ask you is that I kind of read a little more depth, and I was noticing how long that you were, being a heel, and I think it was almost a decade that you were about a heel. I need to ask you, what is your secret to doing that? Because nowadays wrestlers can't be a heel for like 10 months, much less 10 years.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was smart enough to keep myself, alive and with heat because of everything I learned from the old school guys, the psychology. And one of the main things I stole from them and put together that I'm trying to pass on down to these new guys and, change the direction a bit. But what I stole was believability. But when you looked at Bruno, he was so big and ridiculous looking for his day. You believed he could walk through a wall. Chief J. Strongbow, who was an Italian guy, looked more like an Indian than Geronimo. So you believed when he did the dance and gave you the time off, up to just fall down. And what I had was my look, because I wasn't a super big guy ever, but I was a good wrestler, so I was a wrestling heel. But what I made people believe in me was no matter what they thought of wrestling, Larry Zbyszko's a real asshole. They just believed I was an asshole. In real life, wouldn't even want to know me because I was such a jerk. And they believed it. They hated me the second I walked out out the curtain.
Were you under the pressure of all the things that came with being a heel? Like, I know a lot of people saying, like, they've had, foreign objects thrown at them, that they've had, their tires slashed and everything like that. Did you have to deal with that sort of pressure as a heel?
Oh, yeah. I mean, at one time, when the Bruno thing happened, I was the most hated man alive for probably close to a year. But when it first happened, I wasn't prepared. And the one night I was back after the television showed, where I hit him in the head, and a riot started halfway through my match. Wow. And I went out the back. The crowd was chasing me, but it wasn't all barricaded like it is today. And my car was set on fire. I went out the back to leave, and my car was on fire.
Wow.
And then I had other ones smashed. I left the building in Albany, New York. I was shot at. It went over my head, and the bricks above my head shattered after the big loud pop.
Wow. And
I dove back in the building, and then I was overturned in a cab. With one riot, I got stabbed in the ass.
Wow.
I used to have to be driven in by hiding in, trunks of cars. I mean, it was a different day. And like I said, Bruno was so really, beloved because he knew how to get you right. And I was really hated. People really thought I was an asshole. And even back today, I mean, when I started with TNA some years ago, I did a year or so, with them when they were getting started. And AJ Styles and Daniels and The Abyss and James Storm, they're all young guys. But they didn't see me in my prime. They just knew me from WCW, the broadcasting. And then ESPN started showing all the AWA classics a few years ago or so, for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Showing it twice a day on ESPN Classics, all the AWA stuff. And then I bumped into AJ and Daniels and all them guys one day, and they were freaking out. And they were horrified. And they were looking at me horrified, going, how could you be such an asshole? I mean, they couldn't get it. Like you say, heels can't keep the heat for more than, because, I mean, they don't know how to be a good asshole.
There are just some people that are naturally good at being assholes, but apparently you were just really, really good at it. I mean, especially if
Oh, yeah.
Especially if you have somebody, setting your car on fire, stabbing you in the ass, or trying to shoot you. I mean, that's definitely saying something. I mean,
It was wild stuff.
Yeah, you mentioned you had a lot of great matches with Bruno. I think that you guys had like Feud of the Year back in the 80s. Was there any other wrestlers that kind of stood out to you that, really brought out the best in you besides Bruno?
You mean when I wrestled him?
Yeah.
Oh, what a... I hate to brag. I'm trying to say this in a true way and not just sounding... But I was so good with the psychology and how to, in the ring, like they'll term the ring general, that the generation right after me, I mean, it was the Hulks and the Machos and the Ultimate This and all the characters and the clothesline, because none of them could anymore. But I was so good that I could have a good match with anybody. And most of the guys I would wrestle right after Bruno, especially, in the early 80s, because me and Bruno's feud kind of marked the end of the old school era. And then Bruno was basically done, and, Vern Gagne was done, and, all these guys were done. And there was a new generation coming. And it came with all the characters, and everybody was a bodybuilder for a while, a different look.